I guess it should be no surprise that philosophers have differed from common sense, at least common sense according to More. Uh, and that's what the third part of this essay is really about, is about how views in the history of philosophy that so-called philosophers have actually held differ from common sense. And remember, uh, More has said that common sense is what we all believe that we know about what there is in the universe. Um, Now, there have been all sorts of views on these things about what there is in the universe, and I guess, of course, they then differ from common sense in all sorts of ways. And for More, they differ in important ways. That is, the different ways that they differ is important to note. That some views differ from common sense, for instance, skepticism, in saying that we don't know the things that common sense think we know. For instance, that they subtract, let's say, from common sense. The skeptic, and here I think you can see skepticism's basis, although Russell is ultimately not a skeptic, he certainly gives us a kind of a skeptical argument. The skeptic would say about material objects that, well, I mean, they might exist, but we don't know, because all we ever really experience are perceptions of things, what More calls it sense data, that we never actually experience in any sort of direct way a material object. That, as Russell says, that a material object exists, that matter as a whole exists, is an inference we make. That is a judgment that we make on the basis of what we do know immediately, and that is our sense data. Russell believes that inference, if we read further on Russell, I think Russell would say that inference is a valid inference. That is, it's a justified inference for various reasons, where the skeptic would say it's an invalid inference. It's just faulty logic. To say that because I have perceptions of things, because things seem to appear to me, to say that then there are independently existing objects of a material nature which produce somehow and are known through those sensations is a fallacy. We can't really make that inference. So the skeptic differs from common sense in taking something away from common sense. And that is, well, taking something away, not taking something away in the sense that saying that material objects, for instance, don't exist, but saying that we don't know that they exist. Another way that philosophers have differed from common sense is by adding things to the common sense view of things. Basically saying that some things exist and definitely exist and must exist, which common sense would not go that far. Remember, common sense does not say there's no God, for instance. Common sense says that we have no evidence that there's a God. A philosopher who insisted that God does exist and God must exist would add something to common sense, because that philosopher would say then that there are certain things which exist and we know exist beyond material objects and acts of consciousness, God being different from both. So there's a type of philosophy that differs from common sense insofar as it adds something to the common sense view of the universe, that common sense says, well, may exist, but we don't know. The philosopher says these things definitely exist. Now the last view, and this is the one again where Berkeley, who was an 18th century Anglo-Irish philosopher who is an idealist, the last sort of important difference, I think, between common sense and what some philosophers have thought is those philosophers who take away something from common sense. Now remember, the skeptic didn't say there are no material objects. I might have misspoke there. The skeptic says we don't know. We have no real evidence for saying that there are material objects. Now, Berkeley went farther and said that the whole idea of a material object is a contradiction. Everything in our experience, Berkeley said, is ideas. Everything that we experience is an idea, an act of consciousness, perhaps. We have no experience of material objects, and we have very little idea of what they might be. And when we try to say that our ideas somehow are representations of material objects, then things really fall apart. Because then we have to say that somehow or another our ideas, which are purely mental, are somehow like or similar to material objects, but material objects are supposed to be completely and utterly different, right? So how can an idea, which is a mental thing, represent somehow a physical object, which is a material thing? Berkeley just didn't think that, and for various other reasons, that the whole idea of matter or material objects made any sense at all, so he just did away with them. He was a pure idealist in the sense that he believed that only ideas and minds, to think them, were real. And as both Moore and Russell described, he accounted for the persistence of objects when we're not viewing them in various other ways. The sort of crude way of saying is that, well, God is thinking of everything all the time, so when we're not thinking of something, then God is thinking of it, so it still exists. But that's a rather extravagant view of things from the point of view of most contemporary philosophers. So, how do the metaphysical views of philosophers relate to common sense? In various ways, and why is Moore putting this up? I mean, that's a good question. We'd have to read the rest of the book, right? It's a big, long book. But I think one of the reasons he's putting it up is to say, wow, philosophers have really gone wrong in the past, right? Philosophers have really messed up in various ways. And I think that for Moore, the common sense view is the one you start with and the one you rely upon and the one you come back to. And that I think he's suggesting that any philosophy that differs from common sense too widely is probably going wrong.